Marko, Vuksan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Griffin. I'm very grateful for this experience, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Why are you a Catholic?
I was born in a Catholic home all my life, and wasn't really faithful throughout my life until freshman year, until I started to discover and research about the beliefs, and I came to the conclusion that uh, Jesus is real, Jesus is God, and that the fullness of his truth is inside the Catholic Church.
Would you say that you're certain or just like more than likely
For what?
in terms of Catholicism being like the correct Christian denomination and Christianity overall being really just the nature of reality?
I'm certain. I'm
Okay.
very much certain in the beliefs I hold right now, but I'm willing to follow whatever the truth is.
What gives you that certainty?
What gives me certainty is the resurrection of Jesus and the accounts of what happened around 2,000 years ago.
Right. So you agree that, as Paul says in the New Testament, if the resurrection did not happen, as in the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, then your faith is futile, and Christianity as a whole is untrue. You'd agree with that?
100%.
Okay. And you're confident that the
I
resurrection
am
happened?
confident that the resurrection is the most plausible answer to what happened in the Palestinian area 2,000 years ago.
Why?
Well, first I want to get into the point that the Gospels are reliable. Just because by the way, me and Griffin have talked a lot in our time together, and
A lot at lunchtime?
a lot at lunchtime as we are in high school, but we're growing. And one point that he brings up a lot is they have agenda, and that's what makes them irreliable. And every ancient source has an agenda or a bias that they're writing for. And their writing is not necessarily, does not hold any bias, but every ancient source has a bias. Same thing with the Gospels, and that doesn't in turn make them not reliable.
Before we start our discussion, could you just clarify for the audience what the Gospels are? Also, like Paul's letters to Corinthians, just clarifying the main sources we have for the resurrection.
So the Gospels are, we have 4 Gospels, 3 of them being synoptic, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are which are accounts from people who claim to have been of the apostles or have been in close relationship with apostles who were and are all writing about Jesus and his life and his mission and what he had to write. And the first letter to the Corinthians by Paul is Paul writing to the Corinthian church, correcting their beliefs and writing about what they need to correct.
Yeah. So all 4 of the Gospels write a decent amount on the resurrection, and mainly, if I were to sum up my problem with them as like a reliable historical indicator, it would be the fact that, so first of all, Mark, the earliest one, is written, I think, roughly 30 years after the resurrection happened. None of the Gospels have authorship, so they're all effectively anonymous. And even though there's also no way to verify whether they're eyewitnesses, I don't think any of the authors of the Gospels state that they were eyewitnesses. We don't have any way of proving that. And also, like John, for instance, which is written like 70, 80 years after the resurrection, obviously it's pretty implausible just from the time frame that he was an eyewitness. So I see them more as documentation of kind of church tradition and more of what was becoming a legend at that point, rather than like narrative, personal accounts from eyewitnesses.
The problem I have with that answer is that there's numerous amounts of evidence in multiple different categories. One example is geographical and social evidence, like names of towns that are in no other historical record anywhere, and especially during that time where being able to read was something rare, and not only finding people writing about these towns. I mean, I have a list right here where each gospel is adding a new place, if you want to take a look at it later or now, has a new town or place that isn't mentioned in the other Gospels, showing strong evidence that whoever is writing these Gospels is 100% in this region and in this time period. And another, a stronger evidence is the evidence for names, which is a incredibly strong evidence that really does prove how reliable they are. The use of disambiguators between names, like between John and Peter, which are common names, and Jesus, which are common names, compared to other names that are not common and that would not need disambiguator, like Thomas. And if we look at like other false gospels, they completely get this wrong. Some even get names that wouldn't even be in the Palestinian area. And if we look at the average name toll that are written in these sources compared to the rate of the name, the popularity of the name of that time, they're very similar. And it would be incredibly hard to make this up. And one point I would want to circle back to with both of these evidences, it's not like they're plopping, it's not like it's too much evidence, like as if they were plotting it just to make it sound more reliable, but it's more of an unconscious thing. It's not too few that it's hard to decipher if they're true or not, like other early false gospels that were written. And one case that I really think is powerful is when we look at Jesus and how Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't and John don't use a disambiguator with the word Jesus, even though this is a popular name at that time. But when we look at other people referring to Jesus in crowd settings, they refer to Jesus as Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus the Son of God, or Jesus in one of these titles. If we look at when Peter was being tempted, the woman asks him, "You are with Jesus. Weren't you with Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus of the Nazarene?" I mean, it makes sense, because if she just told Simon, "You're with Jesus," I mean, it's such a popular name, there would be no problem with that. But the fact that they have to use this term, to me, it adds more evidence towards why they were during this same time period and of that region. And one last thing I want to bring up that's short is like a botanical, like a plant evidence with the sycamore trees. I don't know if you're aware of this. There's no sycamore trees anywhere in the Mediterranean, only in Jericho. And the Gospels refer to this tree that's only in Jericho, showing that the most plausible answer is that they really were there, and they've really been to Jericho.
Okay, so I'm not necessarily disputing that they were in the same region in a similar time, right? I think you'd accept it's even in the same time frame if we're talking about like 100 years here, right? You'd still call that the same, a similar time, right?
So I would say, especially before the Jewish-Roman War, when they tore down the temple, which is usually the later where scholars declare a later authorship, because they don't believe that the Gospels can predict of the destruction of the temple. That's why they date them to a later time.
Okay, yeah, but even if I accept, which I think they probably were, they were in the same region and the same time, I don't think that rules out or really even does a good job of refuting the notion that they're not like eyewitnesses. You know, even if he's referring to the sycamore tree, there's no reason that couldn't have been passed down through oral tradition. And oral tradition is, you know, a commonly cited kind of reliable method of passing down information by the Christian community. But you agree that, like John, for instance, which is 70 years after, that he or even Luke and Matthew, which were like 50 to 60 years after, they're probably not eyewitnesses, right?
So I still think, to go on, so if they really are of this region, of this time period, it doesn't make sense for them to falsely attribute it to these people. I mean, if we look at the Gospel of Mark, why would they attribute it to the person Mark, who wasn't of the 12? Same thing with Luke, someone who wasn't of the 12, and Matthew, who's a tax collector. If they were gonna use for the Gospels, if they were gonna create it and attribute it to a false person, it makes more sense for them to go with direct apostles and an apostle like Peter, who was the most impactful and was the leader of the apostles. And oral translation, I think, is if we look at oral translation, we look at what we have now. Like I've shown you before, we have all these specific names of towns and geographical evidence of how to get these towns, the elevation and everything, all this resounding evidence. If through oral translation, a common objection to it is the telephone game, and that so much bits of information have definitely been passed down or have been corrupted and lost through history. If through oral translation, it would be expected to lose like maybe these town names and stuff like that, but we don't see that at all.
But why would the town names be expected to be lost?
Because
these, like, even if they are myths, right? By the time of John, which is the latest gospel, they haven't even been circulating for 100 years, which, if you're looking on the scale of myths, that's really not that long of a time. And we know, based on the many manuscripts of the New Testament, that it wasn't solely oral. It was also textual, So I don't think that we'd expect, like, not to see the original cities.
So then, my answers to that is then what would we tend to see?
What do you mean? All I'm saying is that,
like,
I'm saying, like, I don't think you'd expect that all these important cities just aren't referenced. I think it makes sense that in the Gospels.
But if they were corrupted unwillingly, then what would tend to be lost is the name of these obscure towns. No?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the names of the towns that are necessarily lost, but I think the overall reliability is.
Well, I mean, I just give you evidence to why they're reliable with.
So can I give you an example of? I don't think the towns. I don't think the authors necessarily care that much about the town names. I don't think if they were to be corrupted either unwillingly or willingly, I don't think the names of these towns would necessarily be the subject of that. However, what I do think the details would get muddied, certain events would get rearranged. I think that would definitely happen with the crucial events that they are depicting, like the resurrection. So I'm just gonna pull up the Gospels here. So if you take Mark, which is the first Gospel, where are you, Mark? Okay. How it ends with the resurrection, but as it's stated in the English Standard Version, actually, it says some of the earliest manuscripts do not include 16:9 to 20. In other words, the earliest manuscripts of Mark end with this. The women come to the tomb. They see the stone is rolled back. I think there's a man sitting in the tomb. And he says, "You seek Jesus of Nazareth who is crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him." Blah, blah, blah. And then they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So just bear with me. That's how the earliest manuscripts of Mark end, with the women being afraid. They're seeking Jesus. He's not even appearing to any of the disciples or the apostles, or even the women. It just ends with them seeking him. And that is the earliest manuscript we have. So compare this to John, right? John, which is written much, much longer after. We're talking like, 70 to 80 years, whereas Mark is written 30 years after. You have a wide variety of post-resurrection appearances. There's the story of doubting Thomas. He appears to the 7 disciples. Not only does he appear to them, but he goes fishing with them. He eats with them. He has breakfast with them. He gives them this little speech, and he appears to the women as well. So my question is, why do you see so many more details appearing as you move forward in time compared to the earliest manuscripts, which don't even have any post-resurrection appearances. It seems like it should be the other way around, right? You lose details over time.
Okay. Well, first of all, if we're looking at oral translation, we tend to lose bits of information. We don't tend to add information.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm asking why.
Okay, but let me go on to. I think it doesn't really necessarily matter why. I mean, Mark still claims that Jesus rose. If we look at the woman gathering at the tomb.
Does he claim that Jesus is risen?
Yeah. If we look at the, I mean, let me see if I.
Do you want me to go to Mark?
Yeah, I mean, we can go to the ending
like
of
I
Mark.
said, it just ends with the women being afraid. Yes, there's a man at the tomb who says Jesus is risen.
Yeah, which is enough evidence for the. Well,
that doesn't necessarily mean the author is claiming Jesus is risen. If I write a story and I have Marko says that Jesus was resurrected in my story, which you do, in fact, that's not me affirming that Jesus.
Okay,
was
well,
resurrected.
well, it doesn't matter. Someone's claiming in the story that Jesus has rose.
Well, I don't think Mark is claiming that as well.
I said someone in the story is claiming that Jesus.
Yeah, sorry, a character in the story.
So a character in the story is claiming that Jesus has rose. The person who they're specifically looking for, Jesus has rose, and they've ran away. So the only implication that this provides is that someone is saying that this person who was killed 3 days earlier rose. And there would be no reason for Mark to include it other than that he's attributing it to his message that Jesus did rise from the dead. And if we look at Mark and if we look at the Gospels, it's a resounding amount of evidence that, and I just gave you evidence why the other Gospels are reliable. If I would, you can't just critique Mark just because it's the earliest dated Gospel. Yeah. You haven't told me why the other Gospels aren't reliable.
Yeah, so this is what I'm demonstrating with the narrative progression here. So if I were to recount a story of me doing a presentation in class, if I were to recount it a couple days after, and all I tell you is like, I went up to the board, I did the presentation, it went really well, teacher patted me on the back, I sat back down. Year later, someone else tells you, oh, well, here's how the presentation went. Griffin went up to the board, he gave this amazing presentation, everyone was enthralled, they were throwing roses at him, and he put on like sunglasses and dyed his hair, and then he sat back down. That would seem a little weird that I didn't include those details to you when I first told the story. So why is it the case that the description of the resurrection and even the post-resurrection appearances is so much more detailed in John, like by orders of magnitude, than it is in Mark, where you don't even have any post-resurrection appearances? Why are details being added? That doesn't make sense to me if the goal of these is just to...
Well, I mean, we got to look at the four Gospels. They're all attributed to different people and are all written by different people, right? So you can't use the same terminology that, oh, just because they're going back in time, there's more information. I mean,
when you're going forward in time, there's more information.
Okay, when you're going forward, sorry. When you're going forward in time, it's still different perspectives of who's writing what.
Okay.
And I think you're glossing over the fact that in Mark, someone is claiming that Jesus has rose.
Yes.
And that's the crucial point. Someone's claiming that he rose. If Jesus really did rise, that's enough evidence to believe in Christianity.
So just to clarify, it's enough evidence for you if you have a manuscript from thousands of years ago that has a character in it stating something.
It's enough evidence for me that four Gospels and all the apostles had the sincerity to go to martyrdom, and were willing to go to martyrdom for the belief in the resurrection.
Okay, so do you know how many people who witnessed the resurrection were martyred for that belief? That we have like good confirmation of, and that's not just church tradition.
I would say I don't know. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's irrelevant because we don't have to know if they were exactly martyred. We just need to know if they had the willingness to go through martyrdom. And if we look at even other secular sources throughout that time, like Pliny the Younger, who states that he would test these Christians at this during the early Christian era, that they would have to denounce their beliefs. If not, they would be put to capital punishment. And so we see by all these, we see by Josephus as well, and Titus, all these information that they're persecuting these Christians just for the belief in Jesus, right? And so, to me, that's all these Christians are willing to believe in this and are willing to go to martyrdom.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have to prove that they were martyred. All we have to prove is that they're willing to go to martyrdom.
Right. So I agree with you that it's interesting, that it needs some explaining. I think the whole concept of martyrdom is like fascinating. But we see this happening in a lot of other places where we might disagree with the reasons those people are being martyred, or they just might seem like total lunatics. So I've talked to you about this before at lunchtime. We had a good discussion about this. But the Manson family. So last summer I read a book on this, and I thought it was really interesting. The Manson family was basically this group of outlaws in California, led by this charismatic guy, Charles Manson. Him, a couple guys, and a bunch of super young girls. And however he was able to do this, he convinced them all that he was actually Jesus Christ, and that they would have to do whatever he said. And I think a lot of them really earnestly believed this. He was able to, I don't know whether he believed it himself or not, but he was able to really manipulate these people. And it's fascinating because, these like young girls that were seemingly normal at first, what they did on his command was they broke into a like wealthy Beverly Hills home where there were, I think, 5 or so people, some of them in bed, some of them downstairs, and these girls, along with a couple guys, just brutally murdered all of them. And then one of them later on tried to assassinate the president, for Charlie, who is now in jail. They all willingly went to jail, many of them for their entire lives, I think, for Charlie. Okay. So I think the fact that this happened, it's a testament to how charismatic he was, to the situation these people were in terms of their lives. But I don't think me or you would look at that and think, oh, well, he must have actually been Jesus Christ, because look at these people willing to die for that. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
Right.
I mean, what other explanation is there?
But that's not the point I'm trying to make.
I think it's a similar point.
Sorry, I'm sorry. The point I'm trying to make, sorry if I gave you that perspective, but the point I'm trying to make is that the people who witness the resurrection and the people who are dying for that belief sincerely believe that what happened, not necessarily what happened is true, but that they sincerely believe what happened to them. Whether that thing is true, whether it's through some other explanation, whatever means it got to there, it doesn't take, I still 100% believe through the martyrdom argument that the apostles were sincere. In the same way with your example, I believe those people were sincere in their beliefs of Charles Manson being the Messiah. That's not my argument is, if these people are willing to go to the lengths of death for the sincere belief that they seen Jesus rise from the dead, then the question is, what really happened? Or what is the answer to these apostles going, what happened to the apostles for them to be so sincere in this belief? And the most logical answer to me is that Jesus really did rise from the dead.
Okay, so the point you seem to be making is not that the deaths by themselves really prove anything about the truth of the resurrection, but they really just beg the question, like something happened here.
Okay. What I'm trying to say is
that what you're saying?
They prove that
something did happen.
They prove that something happened, and that the apostles are sincere in the belief that something happened.
Yeah. So again, I don't think sincerity in belief necessarily even has any correlation to whether the given thing is true, right?
I agree
you
with
were
you.
to
I
ask,
agree
if
with
you
you.
were to ask a lot of Muslims or atheists, Hindus, whatever it may be, I'm sure you'd find that they're all equally sincere about their beliefs as you are. But as to whether it actually happened, I agree that the
Sorry.
fact
Yeah.
I agree that the fact that they're dying means that there is something that happened that begs an explanation, but I just don't think the resurrection is the most likely out of all of those.
So my point is that they're sincere in their beliefs, and so I stated that the most logical answer is that Jesus really did rise from the dead, and I want to go
Sure.
with you through the three major alternatives. One is that the apostles lied, or Jesus lied. And we just talked about that earlier. I mean, the apostles were sincere in their beliefs. They went to death, or the willingness of death for these beliefs. So we can rule out that the apostles were liars. Now, the most common objection is that they received some sort of hallucination, the apostles, that something happened that made them have these visions that Jesus rose from the dead. And there's no account of, let me just bring this up real quick. There's no, sorry. So what my point is that there's been nothing like that ever in history, where large amount of people have had a shared experience of someone who died and individually had experiences with him and all claimed to see something that no longer existed alive.
Yeah, I agree with you that the hallucination seems pretty improbable. I mean, what I'm more focused on here is, well, did they actually say that he appeared to them in the first place? Because I agree that if they all said that, I mean, it's pretty weird. I still don't think that's great proof of the resurrection. But if all of them did actually say that, and like died for the specific claim that they witnessed the risen Jesus, that's pretty weird. But I don't think we even have strong evidence as far as these people claiming in the first place that Jesus appeared to them. So you have Paul, right? What he does in Corinthians is he just has a brief list of the people that Jesus appeared to. And among this list is 500 brothers and sisters, many of which are still alive, some of which have fallen asleep, and then he calls the reader to go seek them out. So what that appears as to me is kind of, to be honest, just Paul inventing this number to make his claim seem more legitimate. And even if he's saying all these names that Jesus appeared to, do we have any way of really verifying that? I mean, I agree that if you're just looking at ancient history, if he was describing a war or something, maybe we could just take that, maybe we could just take him for his word. But because he's talking about a supernatural claim, I just don't think we can apply the same standards.
See, that's the problem. What I see with a lot of historians is that they have a double standard, where they take an extraordinary event, with the resurrection, they take an extraordinary event. It says it takes more evidence than another extraordinary event. For example, a lot of historians say that, that a Carthaginian general rode a war elephant across the Swiss Alps. I mean, that's an extraordinary claim. And only one Roman historian talks about that 4 decades after what supposed happened, and all grant that it happened, and all believe that. All major historians conclude that this did happen. Yet none of them a majority of them can't even agree on what route they might have taken. And so what I'm trying to say is, yes, it might seem like Paul's trying to add more evidence, and during that time period, anyone could have challenged this belief. Anyone could have just went around asking, where are these 500?
So could they? Let's just. That might seem like a pretty simple task in this world of cars and internet and planes and social media. But if we're talking about 2,000 years ago, you've the whole Mediterranean to comb through, and you're just this rural like Roman peasant who has discovered this document. I mean, are you seriously saying that this guy's going to see, well, 500 brothers and sisters, you should go seek them out? Oh boy, I better go travel to Israel and just comb through the millions of people that are living there to try to find some of these witnesses. I think Paul knew very well that when he was writing that, that's not going to happen, and it's entirely implausible. There's no way of verifying whether there's these 500 people.
Christianity stemming from Judaism in Jerusalem. Judaism is one of the most beliefs that challenge their beliefs. And they're all in the same region, very close, not requiring a long travel to meet them, like the example you brought up. All these people could have brought your exception so easily, saying, well, Paul, where are all these people? And if these 500 people weren't appeared to, we don't really have an explanation to how fast Christianity exploded throughout the empire, and how it moved and converted so many. Your answer to me, that example you brought up seemed kind of arbitrary.
Okay, first of all, the New Testament, a lot of the Gospels, I think Paul's letters as well, weren't they written in Greek?
They were written in Greek.
So I don't think they would have been written in Greek if they were being written to people in Israel. They were being written to people on the north side of the Mediterranean. So yeah, I think it would have been a long journey. As to the spread of Christianity, I think it's very interesting. It's a pretty fascinating event, and I think again, like the whole concept of martyrdom, whether it's these zealots or just terrorists that are willing to blow themselves up for a belief.
Well, that's different.
Hold on. I think that's fascinating. However, if you look at like the growth of Mormonism, for instance, which, given it's only been around for a couple hundred years, is pretty significant, or the growth of Islam, or even the growth of like Hinduism, I don't think you can just look at that and say, well, there's literally no explanation for this. I think the explanation is, as is the case with a lot of religions, that it really taps into certain like cultural and social yearnings that were present at the time. So, it grew very quickly. And I think at that point, people were becoming disillusioned with like Roman paganism and its lack of moral authority. So when Christianity comes in, it's in a very good place. But I don't think that by itself is really good evidence for any of the claims being true.
I mean, I agree with you, but if we look at Mormonism, they had a large amount of people to start and spread the religion. And if we look at Christianity, if it's only 12, it wasn't
only 12.
Well, if we're denying the 500, we're saying 12, maybe some other people, right? The expansion would not be at the rate it was in the beginning. And so I think I want to circle back to the point where I want to go back to the resurrection. I mean, I want to really focus on what did the apostles really see? What are the possible answers to what they see? And I want to understand your perspective. I want to understand, what do you think is one possible answer?
Okay, actually wrote it down in my notebook, all the possible explanations. So first of all, I think even if we go right to the most outrageous explanation, which is the swoon theory, I think that it's the swoon theory. Mm-hmm. I think we both know what that is.
I don't. Sorry.
Oh, okay. But it's I've talked to you about this before. It's basically the idea that when Jesus was crucified, he didn't actually die. He just fainted or he went into a coma. Okay. And here's the thing. I agree with you. That's pretty outrageous. As I think you stated, like the Romans knew how to kill people. I agree it seems pretty ridiculous at face value. But, I mean, what also, to me, as someone who did not grow up in a religious family, what also seems ridiculous, and even more so, is the idea that Jesus actually died and then, over the weekend rolled back the boulder and waltzed out of there a divine, alive man. I mean, that seems far more ridiculous of a proposition than the already outrageous swoon theory. So if those were the only two explanations, I mean, I think I'd be sooner to believe that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross just because of the nature of the claims that we're making.
So if
I mean, one is supernatural and one isn't.
So if we're looking at the Gospels for the crucifixion, right? Mm-hmm. And we look at how even the Roman guards didn't break his legs because they knew he was dead.
Okay.
By the beating and the toll that he took.
Okay.
I think so. So the argument you're projecting is the Romans actually not killing him is is more probable than the resurrection actually happening.
Yes.
And so I mean, at face value, I agree with you, right? But that wouldn't answer all these apostles deciding to believe in going to martyrdom for this belief.
Wait, why? If they truly believed that, let's say, if they saw Jesus on the cross, he's all bloodied, slashes all over his body, his head goes limp, and he gives up the ghost, and they're like, wow, he's dead. I mean, surely, that's just it, and they go off. But lo and behold, he's actually just fainted. And yeah, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but
right.
he's able to start walking around a couple days later.
Yeah.
So if that did happen, and then they see Jesus, why wouldn't they think that, he's actually been resurrected?
So look, we see someone who is crucified and fainted, right?
Yeah.
And is now 3 days later walking around, mm-hmm. interacting with the apostles.
Yeah.
That's not, and he just recovered in 3 days over all these wounds, nails through him.
It's pretty.
Do you think it's plausible for the apostles to completely discount that? Maybe discount due to his appearance that 100% he didn't survive the crucifixion. I mean, think about it. If he had holes through his arms,
he did have holes through his arms. Jesus presents his wounds
no. But
to
what I'm saying,
Thomas.
He has a bodily, right? But he's in a supernatural sense. He's not limping around, right?
How do we know?
How do we know? By if we're treating the resurrection to be true, right?
Yeah.
And we're looking at the accounts. He's not limping around. He's walking around. He's eating with the apostles.
Okay, but how do we know the Gospels don't depict him as limping around?
Based on reading them.
Okay.
Sorry. And your point is, maybe he survived. I think that's first of all for 3 days for no one to notice him to survive in the wilderness or in the desert, and then see his apostles and say, "Yo, I'm here now. What's good? Let me. I'm God and all that. Praise me. I'm fine now." That's not. If he survived that, he would not be fine in the slightest. He would be begging his apostles for food.
I agree with you that it's just totally ridiculous. I agree with you, and I'm not actually positing this as like that legitimate of an explanation for what did happen.
So then,
but the argument I'm trying to demonstrate here is that if these were the only two explanations, even if I agree that the swoon theory is ridiculous, maybe something like this has happened before in history. I'm sure you could find that. Someone fainting or after enduring something brutal, and then them walking around. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anywhere else in history someone dying, their brain shutting off, their body starting to decompose, the blood stops flowing, and then they start walking around again. One is a naturalistic explanation, one is not. So I really just don't think that you could say like this is any less probable than a dead guy actually getting up and walking around, because that's what it is.
Okay, and so we're looking at this, right? It's a miracle for a reason. If you take, for example, David Hume's perspective, where any miracle in history isn't plausible is not can't be answered because there's not going to be enough evidence, then life can't start. I would like to ask you a question. If Jesus did rise from the dead, what would be the evidence? What would the evidence need to be to compel you?
Yeah, so I actually asked my mom this question a couple days ago at dinner, and the answer she gave, which I think was actually a very good one, is that if there were to be anything that was to convince me, it would have to be like some kind of modern account that we actually know happened of literally any kind of resurrection happening, like someone actually dying, biological death as we know it, and then getting up and walking around. If there were to be like one or two or multiple examples of that happening, and you could somehow connect it to what happened back then maybe it would be plausible if we know that this can happen.
So,
but here's the thing: is that we've all seen like everyone on the planet for thousands of years. I'd say generally when people die, they don't get back up. So
okay. Let me branch off of that. I mean, so you've admitted that there would have to be some sort of someone coming back from the dead right now, and that would have to correlate to Jesus somehow. I first of all think that would take away from Jesus' divinity, because if someone else can do it, that doesn't really show that Jesus is God. And the more important point that I want to emphasize is, so there's no historical way that you could prove, no point back in history that you can prove that Jesus, let's say, there's no point that you can prove a supernatural thing happened in the past. For example, any point back in history, not modern, there's no possible way to prove that Jesus rose from the dead.
I mean, I wouldn't say there's no possible way to prove it,
So
but the reason it's so difficult to prove is because that we have a lot of great proof in another direction. So we were talking about this before actually, and I gave the example of like if I told you that this morning I dropped my mug and it fell to the ground and it spilled, like maybe I'm making it up, but you don't really have any reason to believe that. You'd probably take what I'm saying as true, correct? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if I say, well, this morning I dropped my mug and it fell onto the ceiling. So that right there contradicts all of your life experiences ever, all of the life experiences of pretty much everyone who has ever existed, including Isaac Newton. This is a well-established law of physics. Simply put, that when you drop things like on a planet, they're going to fall down. So if you're claiming that something happened that goes against everything we know about that, yeah, you're going to need some like pretty good evidence, extremely solid. And we just don't have that for Jesus.
Two things. You could make the same argument about the existence of the universe. I mean, you could say, well, the universe didn't exist for X amount of time, and now it starts to exist. I mean, this completely changes and contradicts everything. So you can say the same thing with the discussion of life. Organisms. I mean, organisms didn't exist beyond X amount of time.
Hold on, I'm not making a claim about the existence of the universe or about.
Okay, I don't want to. Sorry,
no,
I don't want to divert into that conversation.
I know, but I'm just saying that. I get what point you're trying to make, but I would say that I don't actually know. I'm not making like a truth claim about that. But we do know for sure that the universe does exist. And yes, it's weird, but we know that the universe does in fact exist, so that needs to be explained. Okay. That's all I'm saying.
But so my point is, there's no amount of evidence that would prove to you that Jesus really did rise from the dead. Or better, let me form this in a question. What amount of evidence would prove to you that Jesus rose from the dead?
Like I said, if you had a modern example of resurrection,
scratch the modern out of it. Give me a no modern in it, just only from a historical background.
It's pretty tricky. I mean,
So
look,
so-
can I put it in another way for you? If
let me
if
just-
if someone came to you and they said, okay, here's a good example. Joseph Smith, right, claimed to receive the golden plates from an angel. That contradicts everything you know about Christianity. So I'll ask you, like, what amount of evidence would get you to just drop everything, and I mean everything you believe, and accept something entirely different that just goes against everything you know and that has been established? Like, what amount of evidence would get you to become a Mormon or even a Muslim?
So the amount of evidence that would take me would first be whoever's claiming to see this is sincere in their belief, and that there's more than one person attributing to this claim.
That's the case with Mormonism.
Right. But the point that separates us from Mormonism is these people had a motive. Joseph Smith had a motive. If you look at his lifestyle, engaging with multiple wives, having multiple children, having wives underage, and so you got to look at the motives and what are the other alternatives. Is evidence for the unusual event just easily accounted for with a usual explanation? And the problem where it differs from me is with the resurrection, the usual explanation is not easily accounted for. And so the point I'm trying to make is my friend here, Griffin, can't necessarily answer he can't really tell us how much information would be enough to believe in the resurrection.
I think I will answer.
Okay.
If you don't have an established mechanism of resurrection and it maintains the case that, as we know today, like, people cannot rise from the dead, then you'd probably need a mountain of evidence to convince me, if not no kind of evidence.
And how high is this mountain?
Well, like, as far as ancient history goes, I don't think there's really any amount of evidence if you don't have an established mechanism that can convince me of that.
So Griffin says there's no amount of evidence that can make him believe in the resurrection.
Well, that's again, if you're discounting the idea of an actual, like, biological explanation. Also, if Christianity were a lot more coherent in general, maybe.
What do you mean by coherent?
I don't think it's necessarily I don't think religion and the whole idea of God, but that gets into just something way bigger, is a super coherent idea. But if Christianity were more, convincing as a whole, then maybe it'd be a little easier to believe in the resurrection.
And so just because you believe that Christianity is not easy to, let's say, consume.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. It's easy to consume, but it's
not easy to then digest, or
no. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. Like, you can easily consume the idea. You can easily consume the idea of me dropping a cup and it falling to the ceiling, but does that make sense?
What doesn't make sense about it?
Okay, well, I mean, I was hoping to save some of this for an extra episode, but I guess we can just talk about it briefly. So, I think the amount of claims that Christianity makes, and the nature of the claims, the unprovability of them, the lack of evidence is just, like, way too high for me to really, really take it seriously. I mean, firstly and foremost, you have the idea of an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, omnibenevolent God. Then you have the resurrection stacked on top of that. You have the historicity of the Bible and, like, pretty much every book of this being reliable, and it's just...
They're not reliable? Is that right? Sorry. Let me just make my point. Griffin here says they're lacking in evidence, but he can't tell me what is enough evidence to prove that they're true.
If you're just operating on ancient history, I really don't think
so you can't say that they're lacking in evidence. You're just you can't even tell me what is enough evidence.
Okay, that's an interesting point. But I'm saying even operating on your standards, which I think, like, for evidence are arguably much lower, I still don't think that you can even reasonably conclude that this happened. That's what I'm saying.
You can't reasonably conclude that the resurrection happened?
Yeah.
Because there's not sufficient evidence. Because
Yes.
there's not enough evidence. But you can't tell me what is enough evidence.
Okay.
So the problem. Hold on.
Again,
Let me go. Let me.
all right.
The problem I'm facing is Griffin can't give us a scenario where there's enough amount of evidence, and that means there's nothing that will be able to change his decision and belief of the resurrection unless it happens to him right now. And if we continue with that ideology, we will never be able to have a productive conversation.
Okay, I see what you're saying, but I don't think it necessarily operates this way for all claims. It's just because of the nature of the claim. You know, if there, I guess, again, like if at some point in the future you were to demonstrate a biological way that, you know, like divine intervention or resurrection could occur, if you were to show that this has occurred in other places, or I don't know, if you were to like time travel and have video evidence of Jesus being resurrected, then like maybe. But again, as far as ancient history goes, like if I told you that my great 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 granddad is Genghis Khan, he really liked playing Candy Crush on his phone. His brain was a balloon, and there was a little tiny hamster that like ran through his blood vessels. I mean, how much evidence would it take you to believe that?
It would take me some sort of evidence that whatever that is, or Candy Crush existed at that time, and that people really did believe in these claims, no? Not just Griffin Byrne, but someone of that time period, and multiple people writing about Genghis Khan so enthusiastically about this game he's playing.
Yeah, so I think,
And let me go further, people believing in Genghis Khan playing these video games, and then other people later changing their perspective, like, oh yeah, he does play Candy Crush. And then people being so sincere in these beliefs that he really is playing Candy Crush right now, that we're gonna tell other people Genghis Khan's playing Candy Crush right now. And then suddenly all these people are like, yeah, Genghis Khan really did play Candy Crush.
okay, so first of all, I think you can make the same example with a lot of other religions and conversions, but I don't think that's necessarily relevant, because I think, and we've been discussing this for a while, but I think what this ultimately comes down to is our standards. And I want to talk about where these standards come from. So I think that based on the environment in which you have been raised, based on the fact that so many people you love and trust believe this as sincerely or more sincerely than you do, I think that significantly influences your willingness to believe these claims.
Well,
based on what I would see as like scant evidence. So
Let me
do
just
you
answer
think
that.
your
Hold on.
environment has played a significant role in this?
My environment has played on us in a positive or negative sense. And I would like to say, you have no idea how I came to my beliefs.
Yeah.
And you have no right to assume how I came to my beliefs. And I think it's just disrespectful for you to say, well, you're born in a Christian household, that's why you're Christian.
Yeah, sorry. I don't mean for it to come across that way. Like, I would say that my environment has significantly influenced, if not even been the deciding factor, at least right now, in why I believe the things I do. Like, of course, you know, I feel as if I truly do that I've come to this as a logical conclusion through like careful deduction. But had I been raised in a Christian household where everyone around me who I knew was super intelligent, compassionate people all believed this, you know, I very well might be defending the resurrection right now. So I don't mean to like,
Well,
I don't mean to patronize you by saying that, but I'm just saying, do you think at least that even if you fully believe your belief is true, like I do, would you say you can still be aware of the fact that your environment is like a significant factor?
My environment is a factor for me to do research on. It's a factor, but the deciding factor is what I decide to believe, not my environment. It's the rational choice that I pick. I think I think even you won't admit this. If you were born in a Muslim household, do you really think you would then believe in Islam? No, because
I think I very well might right now. I mean,
right. Okay.
I'm
Well, that's
I'm
where
not
we
sure to
disagree.
be honest, but I think
That's
if
where
you
we
were
disagree.
born in a Muslim household, I think you'd probably be a Muslim.
That's where we disagree because I think I've came to. I mean, you don't know anything about me, so I think you should stop saying that. But what I'm trying to say is, I've rationally came to the conclusion that the resurrection is true, and Catholicism is true. You don't know It's irrational to say, oh, just because I'm in this household is the only reason I believe it. It's a factor pushing me to the belief, but the deciding factor is what I decide, not
Okay.
what environment I would live in. If by that basis, if a single person who is in a Muslim family becomes any other religion, that's automatically wrong.
I don't think so. Obviously there are anomalies, but
So-
but like Thailand, for instance,
how would you consider-
99% Buddhist, or like South Sudan, I think is similar percentage.
Well, let me hold
Muslim.
you off there. I think it's
like have each one of those people really just sat down and thought, well, I mean, was Muhammad really the last prophet? Does that actually make sense? And even if all of them have done that, do you still think that, had they been born in a Christian household, each one of those people would still be a Muslim?
right. Maybe for the ones who don't necessarily partake in such intellectual dialogues like us two, but us two, if the mindset you have right now and the mindset I have right now, if we were born in different households, we would still come to the conclusion that we have came to now, not because of the.
But I'm asking, how do you know that, though?
I know that because I didn't pick Christianity just because my family picked Christianity, nor did you pick atheism just because your family picked atheism.
Well, at least that's what I would really like to think, but I don't know for sure, and I hope that I have some level of self-awareness in regards to, like, obviously that's been a significant factor, the fact that neither of my parents were religious.
Well, maybe we have a different story. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic home who didn't go to church on Sundays. We didn't go to church on Sundays a lot. I only started going back to church when I made the decision in the belief that I truly believe in the resurrection. And that's when I started going back to church freshman year. Before that, I wouldn't say that my home had a big influence on what I believe right now. Maybe not for you. Maybe for you, your home has a big influence. But maybe that's just your scenario, and maybe you got to do more research on it.
Yeah. So I think, again, like I think I've done quite a lot of research, and I don't think, when I was 7, I really wasn't sure whatsoever whether God existed or not. I don't think. I mean, I talked about these issues a lot with my parents, but they never like handed me a viewpoint. They just sort of let me consider things. But children really absorb just everything that is going on.
So Griffin, are you telling me
around
I
them.
am only Christian because my parents are Christian?
No.
So then what is the point you're trying to make?
The
I think we're going down a rabbit hole right now that just doesn't matter.
I don't think that it doesn't matter at all. I just think we need to be aware that our environments, I mean, do seem to, like, statistically be a pretty reliable predictor of what religion you have. So why is it the case that, again, like,
So then why is it the
99%
case
of
with
people
who change their religious beliefs?
I know. I'm asking, like, if you look at Thailand, sure,
Right,
some
because
people have
look,
stopped
some
being
people-
Buddhists.
Look, it's like if they're clicking the box, oh, I am Buddhist, I am Muslim in Sudan or whatever country, doesn't mean they are what they say they are.
I mean, if you go to Sudan, I feel like,
I actually disagree with you, and this is a separate topic. I believe, I don't want to get into this, but in Islamic countries, there's different perspectives on not major issues, but on minor issues. They're not all uniformed in belief,
absolutely.
right?
Same thing
And
with
so
Christianity.
same thing with Christianity. And so I think you can't say everyone, all 99.9% believe in Islam. I mean, some of them believe in other things that other parts of Islam would denounce and say they
Yeah.
are not Islamic, they
Absolutely.
are not Muslim at all.
but again, like if you're born in a Shia household, you're a lot more likely to be Shia. If you're born in a Sunni household, you're a lot more likely to be Sunni.
But what is your
So
argument?
I'm not necessarily making an argument here, but all I'm saying is that we should really consider like the effect that our environment ends up having on our beliefs and to what extent we can really control that. I mean, I think
I feel like we
I
can
think,
control it, though.
yeah, I think,
That's
I
why
mean,
there
it
are
comes down to a
anomalies.
question of like free will, I guess. But
Not really.
just on that point, but this is
I feel like
this is slightly different. So out of all the Christian denominations, right, you came to Catholicism. I remember you were telling me about like the apostolic lineage.
Yeah.
You saw that as so. What about Catholicism is so attractive or just true?
I mean, so first, when I was making my belief in Christianity, I seen a lot of these Protestant YouTubers, and I was really compelled by their belief and their faith and what they projected out. And I mean, it was beautiful. I used to watch a lot of Cliff Netchell, who came to Harvard recently,
Yeah.
and all these streamers and YouTubers who are Christian, Protestant, and would casually say, well, we don't believe in tradition, we only believe in Jesus, and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
That like through time, it subconsciously enters your mind. You're like, oh, this is true. And so I started to break away from Catholicism. But then I started to do research. I mean, like, if Christianity is true, I mean, I don't want to follow. I want to follow Jesus how the apostles followed Jesus. So I was like, okay, well, the next logical step is to learn about the early church. And so I learned about the early church, and I was just looking at all of this stuff about the early church devout in their teachings that many Protestants denounce, like the teaching of the Eucharist, the teaching of Mary, and all these things that were so compelling for these early Christians that all these Protestants now denounce. And I was looking at these churches, and I went to some of my friends' Protestant churches, and they're more of a gathering, more of a musical, oh, congratulations. And
I've been to a couple. Yeah, there.
yeah. And so you've been to a Catholic Mass?
Yeah,
which
that was
is
very nice.
Amazing.
Choir
Good
was
Friday, if any of you guys know. And then I was going to Catholic Mass at the time, but I didn't really know what they were doing. But the vibe was completely different. When you enter in a Catholic church, it's silent. And you're there to worship and honor God. I mean, a Protestant might say the same thing, but you're gathering up, you're ready to listen to your musician, your guitar, whatever the music's going on. You're doing your little Bible study. The Mass is all around the Eucharist, and to me, that was such compelling evidence to a traditional church. And so then the issue is, well, it's just Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, maybe one of the Oriental Orthodox, maybe Coptic. And I came to Catholicism because the papacy was, it sounds like a challenging view, but I mean, to me, just like looking at Peter and how Jesus really did just pick him and said, you are the rock that I'll build my church on, giving him the name Peter, changing it from Simon. I think that's one case that shows that Peter did have an authority and that Jesus was giving someone more authority than the other apostles. And I think Peter was the first pope. And so that gave me the evidence to believe in Catholicism.
So, does it matter? Like, as long as someone is following Jesus Christ and they believe in the Trinity and they know that God loves them and they try to be the best person they can be, then why does all this tradition stuff and all this specifics going down to, like you were saying, the exact region of the world? Why is that so important?
So, I mean, if Jesus really is God, right? Me personally, I would want to know the most I can about him, right? I don't want to learn part of him. I don't want to learn only him in the Gospels. I mean, if we look at the Gospel of John, he says many of the stories have not been written. To me, that was like a wow. to me, that was one of the most, that really changed my perspective on tradition. I mean, John's literally telling us not everything's written in the Gospels, and that tradition, and to me, that was like a key verse that said tradition is important, and that tradition is very much a key essential part. And I think a lot of Protestants now, not a majority of them with high church Protestants and such, but a lot of the non-denominationals don't really give give reverence to the Eucharist. And I've seen Cliff that he's trying to like push it aside as a secondary issue, and I 100% think it's not a secondary issue. And if we look at the ending of John 6, I mean, I think it's clear Jesus is teaching on the Eucharist. And as someone who doesn't really know much about the Eucharist and about Christianity, I won't get too much into it, but I think the Eucharist is a crucial teaching, and I think many people reject that, and I think that's something that too much people reject when it really is important.
Yeah. So in terms of tradition, I think I agree with you that it's important, and that even if we might not know, why it was established originally, a lot of traditions are there for a reason. But I think there's also a point where we need to depart from tradition in some respects. So, like, there's a reason that, in conservative America, there's a lot higher percentage of people who are Christian, I feel like. And if you look at, so-called traditional views, and maybe the views that even the apostles themselves had at the time, I think there are points where we need to kind of detach them from the actual. Okay, I'll just show you what I mean. So this is commonly cited, but this is first letter of Paul to Timothy. So you're going to ask about context here. I know you are. So I'll read the whole little chunk here. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve.
Okay. Just want to say, he said we have to wrap it up.
Okay.
But to answer this point, I've heard this objection a lot. Timothy, this letter, it's not necessarily saying that women can't teach anywhere. It's saying that they, especially these women of this time, they were spreading a lot of what we call heresy and a lot of bad teachings. And so people are taking it somewhat out of context in the sense that they're applying this to all, they're trying to say, well, now we see in Protestants are making an argument, well, look at this, look what they used to have done. That's not the point of what he's trying to say. He's trying to say these women in this specific place are teaching incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
And he's
okay. So he's not making that as a broad statement here. Is that what you're saying?
A broad statement.
Like,
so well,
I feel like part of the point of this letter is to kind of is to correct people, as many of Paul's letters were, on what the correct teachings were. So.
But to that specific place. But we do have the teaching that women cannot be priests. Is that the argument you're trying to make, or
things like that?
So yeah. The argument, the main reason I have, I wasn't prepared to talk about this, and I don't really know much about this. But the main, one of the main reasons is, first of all, Jesus picked 12 apostles, who are all men. That doesn't mean he's sexist, but he knows that women have different roles. And the second, more important part to me is, during the Eucharist, during when the bread becomes the body, the priest is in nome de Christi, which means he is it's like some sort of theological thing where he's representing Christ, and Christ was a male, he wasn't a female. Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest point. I think we got it.
Yeah. Just for a last question before we wrap up, I just want to end on this note. How has becoming a really committed Christian made a difference in your life?
it has had a huge impact, and I think it's a blessing. I used to have no necessarily. I used to have no passion. I used to be nowhere. I used to be. I had no meaning, and I was in a very bad place. And I found Christ, and He gave me meaning. And especially in the place that we live in, the society we live in, Christianity and Catholicism especially is very much looked down upon. And I think we got to change that, and that's why I'm so vocal about my beliefs and why I want to talk to so much people like you. As someone said a long time ago, don't know who, without religion, anything is permissible. And so I encourage all of you guys to do more research and to consider both of our perspectives throughout this conversation, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on Forbidden Fruit.
Thank you. First episode. Thank you.